Well, hello, Regan. Regan Keegan, hello. Morning hands? More like cold hands. It's getting cold. Nights are drawing in. I need number 9. Nope, gonna go for 8. And I get cold easily. I hope you're doing well. Maybe I should do it that way. put something on for you guys to listen to.
In December of 1994, Joanne Katranak told friends about a disturbing telephone call she received from someone she had never met.
Stop calling her.
3 days later, Joanne Katranak and her 4-month-old son Alex disappeared without a trace. Telephone records could not identify the caller, but investigators suspected that the incident might hold the key to their disappearance. Joanne Katranak was a strikingly attractive young woman, a good student, and an outstanding athlete who had hoped to pursue a career in the fashion and beauty industry.
She was very concerned about her appearance. She was very, very pretty. And, she made sure every hair was in place before she even, took the garbage out. And, she was a very loving child.
Joanne was known to family and friends for her upbeat personality and optimism, qualities that were tested when her first marriage ended in a painful divorce. But in 1992, she met Andrew Katranak, a 38-year-old building contractor who was 14 years her senior. Despite the age difference, the two hit it off immediately.
Andy was kind of on his own. He had been in a relationship. Joanne was in a relationship, and so they had something in common. And they, as I said, became really good friends. And then, of course, it escalated into more than friendship.
After a brief courtship, Andrew and Joanne married, and the couple moved into Andrew's home in the small working-class town of Catasauqua, Pennsylvania. 15 months later, Joanne gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Alex.
I have pictures of me holding Alex in my office, and he just was smiling all the time. And he was big for his age. He, a nice healthy baby, and was just a joy to have around.
On December 15, 1994, Joanne Katranak called her mother-in-law at 1:15 in the afternoon. Joanne said she and the baby would be right over to pick her up so that the three of them could go Christmas shopping together.
We'll be over in about 15 minutes.
But Joanne and the baby never arrived. Andrew Katranak came home from work around 6:30. He was surprised to find that his wife and son were not home. The baby's diaper bag was missing. Joanne's purse was gone too, so were their winter coats. There was nothing out of place inside the home. No money or valuables were missing. The only thing Andrew noticed was that the hinge on the basement door was pried from the door jamb, and the telephone line in the basement had been cut. 4 hours later, at 10:30 that night, Andrew Katranak called police to report his wife and son missing. Relatives found Joanne's car down the street in the parking lot of a local bar, not in its usual location in the alley behind her house. Although it was locked, Joanne's keys were inside the car. On the back headrest were several strands of long, blonde hair, which did not belong to Joanne since she was brunette. On the distal ends of the hairs were microscopic traces of dried blood. DNA analysis revealed that the blood was either from Joanne Katranak or her son Alex. Investigators also began to check out Andrew's alibi, that he had been at work all day on a construction site.
He's the last person that sees her alive. The vast majority of homicides are committed by a person who the victim knows. So you cannot just eliminate that by accepting that an individual says, well, I wasn't there. I was at work.
They said that he must have something to do with the fact that she's disappeared, and the police actually said that, oh, she probably ran away with someone. In a million years, Joanne would never have run away. And I was quite angry with the police that they accused Andy.
Days passed, then weeks, and when the banks reported there had been no activity on Joanne Katranak's credit cards, it was becoming painfully clear that Joanne and Alex had been the victims of foul play. Christmas passed, and so did New Year's of 1995, still with no sign of 26-year-old Joanne Katranak or her infant son, Alex. The Katranaks lived on a busy street across from a local bar. Neighbors said they saw nothing suspicious on the day of Joanne's disappearance, and police were skeptical that Joanne and her baby could have been abducted in broad daylight. But 4 months after they were reported missing, the worst fears of the police were confirmed. In the remote stretch of rural farmland, a farmer plowing his field noticed what first appeared to be a bundle of clothing. When he looked closer, he discovered the decomposed body of a woman lying on her back, and on her chest, a baby. About 40 feet away was a baby rattle shaped like a phone. It was Alex Katranak's favorite toy.
From then on, our life changed. So anything after that did not have as much of an impact as when they were found. The 4 months they were missing was absolutely the most painful time in my life, of all our lives.
Close to the bodies was a milk bottle and diaper bag, with 2 long, blonde hairs still attached. The hairs were microscopically similar to the hairs found on the headrest of Joanne Katranak's car. Since Joanne Katranak's jewelry was found with the body, the motive did not appear to be robbery. An autopsy discovered that Joanne Katranak had been shot once in the face at point-blank range with a .22 caliber pistol. She had also been beaten.
Due to the fact that she sustained 1 gunshot wound to the face and then approximately 19 blows to the head, led us to believe that the gun probably had jammed, and because of the gun jamming, the assailant had to resort to blunt object and beat her about the head.
The coroner was not sure whether little Alex died from exposure or had been suffocated.
I can remember till this day seeing that infant being lifted off of the abdomen of his mother. It certainly tugged at our heartstrings, it brought a tear to my eye. And if nothing more, it certainly galvanized the law enforcement community and got us moving in the right direction.
The bodies were found in an extremely remote area, about 15 miles from the Katranak's home, which told investigators something important about the killer.
victims were on the trail. So after inspecting the scene very thoroughly, we felt very strongly that the person who had killed Joanne and Alex Katranak had been in this area before and was familiar with these trails.
The trails were used by horseback riders, and Andrew Katranak told police that one of his former girlfriends managed a horse stable, the Silver Shadow Farms, just a mile down the road. Her name was Patricia Rohrer. She and Andrew lived together for 2 years in the late 1980s and again briefly in 1991. When they broke up, Patricia Rohrer moved to North Carolina, had a child with another man, and had been living there ever since. When police questioned Patricia Rohrer at her home in North Carolina, they immediately noticed that she was a brunette and not blonde,
Patricia Rohrer?
like the hairs found in Joanne's car and on the diaper bag.
Can you answer a few questions?
Were you in Pennsylvania during the week of December 15 last year?
Rohrer said she was in North Carolina on the day of Joanne's disappearance, 500 miles away from Pennsylvania, and had witnesses to prove it.
All right, thanks for your time.
I think she gave us something like 4 or 5 alibis as to where she was at. One, she was at a private club. One, she was out buying feed for horses. One, she was at a tanning salon.
But Andrew Katranak had another surprise for investigators. He remembered that Patricia Rohrer called his home just 3 days before his wife and son disappeared. Joanne answered the phone, and when Patricia Rohrer identified herself, the two argued.
Andy has told you to stop calling here. We have a baby now. We're happy together. Just leave us alone. Stop calling here.
Patricia Rohrer denied making that call, and her home telephone records confirmed her story. With brunette hair, an alibi, and no evidence she called the Katranaks' home, investigators feared they had hit a dead end. Investigators wanted to know as accurately as possible when Joanne and Alex Katranak were killed. Although the bodies were discovered 4 months after they disappeared, it wasn't clear how long the bodies had been in the field. The bodies contained evidence of insect activity, and police asked Dr. Kejun Kim, a forensic entomologist at Pennsylvania State University, for an analysis of what the insect activity revealed about the time of death.
This case was rather complicated because 2 bodies involved, 2 victims involved. And the same time that a body were laying on the ground in the wild in wintertime. And so that there are different waves of insect invasions to the body.
First, Dr. Kim found the hard outer shell of the Calliphora levidia, shown here magnified 150 times. This species of blowfly had progressed to its final stage of development. Dr. Kim also found another species, Sinomyopsis cadaverina, that was just beginning its 3rd and final stage of development. These 2 factors told Dr. Kim that the bodies had been in the field for at least 51 days, since early February. And when Dr. Kim looked at the local weather conditions, he also noticed another important piece of information. Between December 21st and the 28th, local temperatures were unseasonably warm, reaching 50 degrees. The perfect conditions for these 2 species to mate and lay eggs. Investigators now knew that the bodies had not been placed in the field recently. They were there since February, and possibly as early as December, the time of the abduction. Patricia Rohrer's telephone records revealed that she made long-distance telephone calls from home almost every day. But there were no calls made between December 11th and the 16th, suggesting she was not in North Carolina when Joanne Katranak and her son were abducted. Patricia said she was at the Cowboys nightclub in North Carolina on the night of the abduction. A state law requires all patrons of the club to sign in, but Patricia Rohrer was not signed in on that date. Patricia Rohrer also denied owning a .22 caliber pistol, and the search of her home turned up nothing. But one of her old boyfriends contradicted her. He told police Patricia Rohrer owned a .22 caliber chrome-plated semi-automatic weapon like this one. He said the gun had a unique characteristic.
An unusual feature about the gun, he stated, was the fact that you fire one shot out of the gun and the gun would jam. You couldn't fire a second shot. Well, that really caught our attention, of course.
But police still had the problem with the blonde hair found at the scene and in the victim's car, since Patricia Rohrer was a brunette.
And she looked at the warrant and she saw we were looking for dirty blonde hair. She's sitting there as a brunette saying, "Who's got dirty blonde hair? I don't have dirty blonde hair."
We were sitting in our office one day and we were discussing how could we determine what color Patricia Rohrer's hair was at the time of the murder. And we both agreed that the only way to do that was to try to obtain a picture of her in and around the time of the murder.
After a little digging, police discovered that Patricia Rohrer competed in a horse show in Guthrie, Oklahoma in December of 1994 and had won a prize at the competition. The pictures of the winners that day showed Patricia Rohrer with bleached blonde hair. The photo was taken just 11 days before Joanne and Alex Katranak disappeared. But prosecutors needed more than just the photograph. They needed to know for certain whether the blonde hair at the crime scene belonged to Patricia Rohrer. The blonde hairs found on the diaper bag next to Joanne Katranak's body and in her car did not contain enough root material for traditional DNA testing. Investigators' only hope was to try a new type of DNA test, one that had never been admitted into evidence in a Pennsylvania trial, something called mitochondrial DNA. Traditional DNA testing analyzes the nucleus of the cell, found in abundance in bodily fluids and tissue. But outside of the cell nucleus are what are known as mitochondria, cells that can be identified, although not as precisely as in traditional DNA testing.
Most hairs from crime scenes have very, very little amounts of DNA. However, there's more mitochondrial DNA in those hairs. There's more copies of mitochondrial DNA in those hairs than nuclear DNA. Therefore, in hairs obtained from crime scenes, most of the time, we can obtain a mitochondrial DNA sequence where we would fail with nuclear DNA analysis.
First, scientists washed the hair in detergent, then added a digest buffer to eliminate everything except the cells to be analyzed. In this gel-like matter is the DNA of a killer. To identify the DNA sequence, a PCR test was conducted, and the mitochondrial DNA sequences from the blonde hair matched Patricia Rohrer's DNA profile. This was enough to convince prosecutors that Patricia Rohrer was at the crime scene and inside Joanne Katranak's car. Patricia Rohrer was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors believed that Patricia Rohrer was in Pennsylvania and not North Carolina when she called for Andrew Katranak. But when Joanne answered the phone, Patricia's hopes of meeting Andrew for old time's sake were quickly dashed.
We have a baby now. We're happy together. Just leave us alone. Stop calling here.
And when Joanne hung up, prosecutors believe Rohrer got angry and sought revenge. For the next 3 days, Rohrer stalked the Katranak's home to observe Joanne's daily routine. On December 15th, sometime after 1 p.m., Patricia Rohrer broke into the Katlanak's basement and overheard Joanne on the telephone with her mother-in-law.
We're about ready for you, okay? We'll be over at about 1:30. I just have to get the baby ready. Uh-huh. Great. Mom, okay, 15 minutes. Bye.
When Rohrer heard Katranak was leaving, she decided to wait for them outside in the alley and cut the telephone line to prevent any further calls. At gunpoint, Patricia Rohrer forced Joanne into her car, ordering her to drive to the remote farmland. Patricia Rohrer fired a single shot into Joanne Katranak, and when the pistol jammed, beat her to death. The baby was left on his mother's chest. The murder weapon was never found, but Patricia Rohrer left 2 bleached blonde hairs at the crime scene, and some hair stained with the victim's blood in Joanne's car as she drove it back to town. At the trial, Patricia Rohrer's defense team scoffed at the notion that an alleged argument she had with Joanne Katranak was a believable motive for murder.
And the defense was saying, come on, that can't be a motive. Normal people don't act like that. And he was right. Normal people don't act like that. But this particular person was not normal and acted just that way.
After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Patricia Rohrer guilty of both murders, and she was sentenced to life in prison.
She's going to have to live with what she did. And I hope her life isn't happy, because mine isn't. I tried to get on with my life, and I've made some, strides. But you never, ever get over the loss of a child, a grandchild.
The case was a first in the state of Pennsylvania, and was only the 3rd time in the United States that a conviction was secured with mitochondrial DNA.
This case is a classic example of the power of mitochondrial DNA. The only forensic evidence obtained in this case really were the 3 hairs from the crime scene. 3 hairs that, unless you look very hard for, you might very easily pass over.
I'd have to say this, that in all my years in law enforcement, the Katranak investigation is one of the finest pieces of police work that I've had the pleasure of being involved in. There were many unique challenges to this investigation. The technology that we employed in the development of at least one key piece of forensic evidence was literally 21st century technology in the 20th century.
All homes have a history, which includes the memories, hopes, and dreams of all who have lived there. But this home in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in suburban New York held something more. In a steel drum, stored in a crawl space, was a secret that someone had hoped would last a lifetime. September 2nd, 1999, was moving day for the Cohen family in Jericho, New York. Before leaving that day, Ronald Cohen noticed that the sanitation workers hadn't picked up all of his trash. A note on a large steel drum said it wasn't removed because of its weight. Cohen had no idea what was inside, since it had been in a crawl space in his home since the day he moved in 9 years earlier. When he broke the seal, Cohen was overcome by a terrible stench. Inside, he saw a human hand and a lady's shoe. Local police transported the drum to the Nassau County morgue, where all of its contents were carefully removed for forensic examination. Inside were the mummified remains of a young woman. There were also some plastic pellets, a green plastic flower stem with leaves, and a woman's pocketbook which was submerged in a mysterious brownish-green liquid at the bottom of the drum. The liquid had virtually destroyed the contents of the pocketbook, which might have identified the victim. The cause of death appeared to be blunt force trauma to the head.
What was most noteworthy to the body and the cause of death were that there were 10 different injuries called lacerations in the back and upper part of her head. There were multiple fractures to the skull. In some areas, the skull was broken into small pieces. There also was blood staining to these areas of injuries, indicating that they occurred while she was alive.
But who was this murdered woman? The medical examiner determined that the woman was either white or Hispanic, between 20 and 30 years of age. She stood approximately 5 feet tall. She also had some unusual dental work.
It didn't appear to be dental work that was performed in the United States. It led me to believe that it was from a South American country.
When Dr. Catanese x-rayed the body, he made a shocking discovery. A 17-inch fetus, a close to full-term baby boy. 3 pieces of jewelry were removed from the body, 2 rings, and a locket that was inscribed, "To Patrice, love, Uncle Phil." The first discovery would come from the barrel itself. There were several coded numbers on the drum. One was as good as a fingerprint. It led to a chemical company in Linden, New Jersey. Company records indicated that the drum was manufactured in 1965. Now, 34 years later, it shows up as someone's makeshift coffin. A 55-gallon steel drum, concealed in the crawl space of a suburban New York home, revealed shocking evidence of a homicide. The most recent owner said it had been in the crawl space since the day he moved in 1990. The owner before that told police the same thing, and said it never occurred to him to open the container, since there were chemical labels on the side. The woman's purse found in the liquid at the bottom of the drum contained some papers and an address book. The pages were illegible, since the liquid had reduced the paper to little more than pulp. They were all sent to a forensic document examiner for analysis.
It was so heavily and thickly encrusted with a brownish yellow slime. It was like a jelly-like substance, and it coated everything. And when I touched the evidence with my gloves on, I could see it just came right off of my hands.
The items had to be placed in the forensic drying cabinet for several days to draw out the moisture. When dry, they could be examined with a video spectral comparator, or VSC, which combines advanced digital engineering with a full range of infrared light sources in order to visualize writing that is not discernible with the naked eye. This technology can show where alterations have been made on a check with the various light sources. Under an infrared luminescence setting, the different inks will glow. Magnification can also detect when official documents have been altered. 2 pages of a legal contract appear the same, but under ultraviolet light, it reveals that one of the pages was added later. Indented impressions left behind become visible with oblique or side lighting. Light from behind or transmitted light can show what's written under correction fluid. After the pages from the barrel were dry, the results were disappointing. The liquid had removed the ink from the pages. But after hours of meticulous and delicate work under infrared camera filters, the document examiners started to see the names and addresses in the address book.
As I put it under the machine and tried the various filters and lights, some names and phone numbers and addresses started to come up in the book. It was actually quite amazing to see writing appear from within the pages of this book that had been submerged in these fluids for 30 some odd years.
But the information in the address book was 30 years old too. And when investigators dialed the telephone numbers, the individuals had long since moved. Facing an apparent dead end, investigators turned their attention to the family who owned the home in the 1960s, the time frame in which the steel drum had been manufactured. The owner in those years was a man named Howard Elkins, who is now retired and living in Boca Raton, Florida.
And we have people in the neighborhood who are long-term residents say, yeah, he was involved in some plastics company in Manhattan.
The plastic connection rang alarm bells, since a plastic leaf and plastic pellets were found in the drum, along with the murdered woman. In the 1960s, Howard Elkins was part owner of the Melrose Plastic Company in Manhattan. The company manufactured plastic plants and trees. As investigators made plans to interview Howard Elkins in Florida, the address book from the drum started to reveal more names and more secrets. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together in the search for the identity of the murdered pregnant woman found in the metal drum. The serial numbers on the drum led investigators to a chemical company based in New Jersey.
I went there with a detective from our lab who has some knowledge of chemicals. We went there and we showed them the pellets and we showed them the gene material. Showed them pictures of the barrel.
The chemical company identified the green liquid in the bottom of the drum as a dye, a halogen green dye used to color the bases on plastic flowers and trees, but it hadn't been manufactured since 1971. The pellets in the drum were the type used in making plastic leaves and flowers, like the plastic leaf found with the body. The local newspaper coverage of the unidentified woman in the steel drum led to an anonymous telephone call to the Nassau County Police.
He tells us about the drum, where it comes from. He tells us that was the chemicals that they used when they were mixing the bases for these artificial trees. So he puts all this together. He puts everything in perspective for us.
The caller did not know the identity of the dead woman, but said that Howard Elkins was having an affair in the 1960s with an Hispanic woman who worked for him in his plastic factory.
So we now have things to talk about other than the fact that there was a barrel found under his house.
When police flew to Boca Raton, Florida to speak with Howard Elkins, he wasn't entirely cooperative.
Did you ever use this type of a barrel in your business? No, you never had any barrels like that.
No, we never had any barrels like that.
Did you ever use a dye known as halogen green?
We never used the chemical. We had no need to use it.
There were plastic pellets found in the barrel, and we believe that they were used in your business. Is that right?
Oh, I don't know what they would have been used.
He lied to us. We knew he was lying to us within 5 minutes of the interview.
I asked him at one point, did you ever have an affair when you were working? And he kind of surprised us, and he said, yes.
But then we went into what was her name, I don't know. Can you describe us? 30 years ago. I said, you seen
her before. I don't know, was she tall? Was she short? Was she fat? Was she skinny? Was she Spanish? I don't remember.
After about 20 minutes of this, I had removed from my briefcase a kit, and I asked him if he would give me permission for me to take a swab from the inside of his mouth for DNA purposes, to see if he in fact is the father of that baby. He told us no. He said that, he didn't think he would allow that.
The interview was interrupted by a phone call from Elkin's wife. Elkins asked the police to leave, saying he wanted to speak with her privately.
This is private. You're gonna have to.
After he asked us to leave, we told him that we would. I said that there's not a doubt in our mind that he was involved in it. I stood up and I stood right in front of him and I said, we're going to leave now, Mr. Elkins. We're going to get a court order. We're going to come back with that court order. We're going to take your blood. And we're going to match your blood up to the dead baby and that dead girl. And we're going to come back here and arrest you for murder and put you in jail for the rest of your life. He nodded his head and he opened the door and asked us to leave.
As police left to get the court order, Howard Elkins left to go shopping. He purchased a shotgun and some ammunition. Howard Elkins was found inside a neighbor's garage by police and his own son. A shotgun between his legs, a fatal self-inflicted wound to his head. The 70-year-old retired plastics executive left no final note of explanation. After his suicide, investigators took a sample of Howard Elkins' blood and sent it to LabCorp, a North Carolina DNA testing facility.
When we're testing for paternity, we look for shared DNA bands between the child or the fetus and the alleged father.
In the case of the fetus found in the drum, there were obstacles to overcome. The tissue samples from the fetus were very badly degraded after 30 years. A technique called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, allowed scientists to amplify the existing DNA, making an analysis possible.
This is the DNA banding pattern from the fetus. This is the DNA banding pattern from Mr. Elkins. At every region of the DNA that we tested, the fetus and Mr. Elkins have a band in common. Mr. Elkins could not be excluded with a 99.93% probability of paternity.
Although the crime was solved, one mystery remained: the identity of the woman in the drum. The small address book that had been submerged in the green liquid in the bottom of the drum was finally starting to tell a story. 30-year-old secrets on blank pages that were now readable with the latest in forensic technology.
I kept looking through the book, and on this page, on the second line, I found the name Mr. Elkins and the address in Manhattan with a phone number.
On another page, barely readable, were the words Residencia Nombre, a resident alien number, and the address and telephone number of someone named Kathy Andrade. Investigators were surprised to learn that after 30 years, she was still living in the same apartment with the same telephone number. Kathy Andrade knew immediately the identity of the pregnant young woman in the drum. She was a student in her English class, Reina Angelica Marroquin from El Salvador.
This lady almost immediately went to tears. She told us that she knew Angelica Marroquin, that she was one of the more lovely people that she ever knew, and that she disappeared 30 years ago.
Kathy Andrade never knew what happened to her friend, Reina Marroquin, although she feared she had met this foul play.
And I was in shock, and I said, oh my God. It's hard to believe that these things can happen.
Reina Marroquin came to the United States in 1966 and lives here in a modest room in a Catholic home for single women. She attended classes at the High School of Fashion Industry and got a job at the Melrose Plastic Company making artificial flowers.
She had a beautiful personality. She she always talked about her family, and she was in touch with the family, how much she loved New York. And her dream was to become an American citizen.
Shortly before she disappeared, Raina told Kathy that she was pregnant, but she did not tell her who the father was.
Is he going to marry you? She said, eventually he will marry me. I never asked who because she never said who he was.
But Raina told Kathy that her boyfriend was married with 3 other children, and Raina was beginning to question whether he had any intention of leaving his wife and children to marry her.
So she got very angry. She called the house, and who answered the phone was his wife. And she told his wife that she was expecting a baby from her husband. Then he called her back, and he says, I am going to kill you. I will never forgive you. She was crushed. She was terrified. He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me. I said, why do you? She says, I don't know. I just made a stupid mistake.
When Kathy Andrade went to Raina's apartment, she found the door unlocked, but there was no sign of Raina.
And I waited for about 3 hours. When nobody returned, the phone never rang or anything, I got scared. I walked into the police station and I spoke to the officer. And he says, are you a relative of the young lady? I said, no, I'm only a friend. And I said, but she's pregnant, she's about to have a baby. Oh, he said, you know, she probably went shopping.
And since Kathy Andrade didn't know the identity of Raina's lover, there was little more she could tell police.
About Raina, honestly, I feel sorry. Because there was a future for her. You know, she paid very dear for that mistake.
Investigators believe that Howard Elkins lured Raina to the factory one night shortly after she told Elkins' wife about their affair, and Elkins beat her to death. He then took the body to his suburban Long Island home, probably with the intention of dumping her into the ocean from his boat. He placed the body into a steel drum from work. To make sure it would sink to the bottom of the ocean, he weighted it with plastic covers. But he miscalculated the weight of the drum after he sealed it. At 350 pounds, it was much too heavy to carry onto his boat. His only alternative was to push it into a crawl space in his home, and there it remained undisturbed through numerous owners for 34 years.
And for 30 years, she spent in the barrel while Howard Elkins raised his family and had his children go to school and led whatever as normal a life as you can, you know, waiting for that other shoe to drop.
And if trash collectors hadn't refused to pick up the drum, the secret of Howard Elkins and Raina Angelica Marroquin might never have been discovered. Oscar Corral covered the story for Newsday. He flew down to El Salvador to try to find Raina's family. In San Martin, a small village outside of San Salvador, he found Raina Marroquin's 95-year-old mother.
She came out to the front of the house where there's a porch, and I said to her, I'm a reporter from Newsday, New York. I told her that police had discovered a woman who had been murdered 30 years ago, and when she saw her daughter's picture, she almost fainted. She had to lean on somebody who was carrying her. Her face fell. She immediately began to weep. It had been 30 years that this woman waited for an answer. She told me she had dreams about her daughter for 30 years. She told me she had a dream even that her daughter was in a barrel that haunted her for so long.
Reina Marroquin left El Salvador because she discovered her husband had a lover who was pregnant with her husband's child. When she fled to New York City, Reina found herself in the same situation, although this time she was the pregnant other woman in a love triangle that had disastrous consequences.
So she was on both sides of the fence in this case, and in the end it cost her her life.
Investigators found one last message on a blank piece of paper found in the drum alongside Reina Marroquin and her unborn child. A message possibly from Reina herself to Howard Elkins. It said, "Don't be mad. I told the truth." In 1996, a suspicious house fire destroyed the home of a Seattle, Washington policeman. In a bizarre twist, an ex-convict confessed to setting the fire, then mysteriously disappeared. When investigators looked carefully at the written confession, they discovered clues of a more serious crime than arson. They found evidence of murder. Sergeant Matt Bachmeyer was a 25-year veteran of the King County Sheriff's Department, a man well-liked and respected by his peers.
This guy was a police hero. He had been involved in several different types of shootouts or real interesting type of events, and had survived them.
On July 9th, 1996, at 1:30 in the morning, a fire broke out in Sergeant Bachmeyer's suburban home. Bachmeyer was at a local bowling alley when the fire broke out. By the time the fire was extinguished, the home was almost completely destroyed. The origin of the fire appeared suspicious, and dogs specially trained to recognize flammable liquids or accelerants were sent to sniff through the rubble. The dogs identified 5 different areas where accelerants were used to set this fire. One was in the basement, a second in the dining room. There were 2 separate areas in the attic, and the 5th was in the garage. In arson terms, this is called a layering fire. On the outside wall of Sergeant Bachmeyer's garage were spray-painted messages critical of police. One said, "Rios lives." Guadalupe Rios was a man Sergeant Bachmeyer had shot and killed 8 years earlier in the line of duty. Bachmeyer told colleagues that he had received threats from Rios' friends and relatives, but until now, they had only been threats. Captain Dave Marin was Sergeant Bachmeyer's supervisor.
We are concerned anytime a fellow officer's home is arson, that's a traumatic event for them. And I talked to him about what he might need as a way of help and support and time off to recover from that.
While the arson investigation continued, Sergeant Bachmeyer himself uncovered some important information about the fire. It happened when he was called to break up a neighborhood fight.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Did anybody here say what happened?
One of the men in that fight was Brad Wren, who had a history of mental problems and had some prior brushes with the law.
What happened?
Well, I can start off by telling you 2 weeks ago he was shot in the leg. And now tonight he got in a fight with his roommate's brother.
You doing okay? Is that leg all right?
It's certainly killing me, but I guess it's coming to me.
All right, let's get down to the police station. Take your statement there.
Sergeant Bachmeyer asked Wren to come to the police station so that he could take his statement. According to Sergeant Bachmeyer, during questioning, Wren asked Bachmeyer if he was the cop whose home was destroyed by the recent fire.
Are you the cop that had his house burned down?
Yeah, why?
When Bachmeyer said yes, Wren allegedly told Bachmeyer that he knew the identity of the arsonist.
It's a drug dealer I met in the bar. Pepe Hernandez.
Pepe Hernandez told Wren that a local cop had stolen some drugs and money from him during a recent drug bust.
Hey man, this cop busted me the other day.
Yeah?
He stole my dope and my stash of money.
What are you gonna do?
I know where he lives, and I want to get my stuff. Look, I'll give you $500. You come help.
The cop Hernandez was talking about was none other than Sergeant Bachmeyer.
So I said, okay.
Then what happened?
You broke in your house. Pepe tore the house up. You couldn't find the drugs or the money. So Pepe started stealing paintings and statues. I heard him say he was gonna burn your house down. And then he just did it.
Where is he now?
You think I'm gonna help you find him? You're crazy. He'll kill me. When I left, he was pissed, and I'm glad he's gone.
Sergeant Bachmeyer transcribed Wren's entire statement, had Wren sign it, then released him from custody. But Bachmeyer had a dilemma. The confession implicated him in the theft of drugs and money. So he decided not to turn it over to his superiors. At least, not yet. Brad Wren, the man who allegedly confessed to taking part in the arson of Sergeant Matt Bachmeyer's home, had a history of mental problems. It all started when Brad Wren was in the Air Force. He was in a severe motorcycle accident and barely escaped with his life.
He had massive brain injuries. They didn't know if he went in a coma. They didn't know what to tell us or anything till he come out of the coma.
Wren eventually recovered, but he was never the same after the accident. His personality changed. He was more aggressive, and for the first time in his life, got into trouble with the law. Shortly after the accident, he was convicted of a sex-related offense and spent 3 months in prison. More recently, Wren was in a violent argument with his roommate, Emmett Marcel, who shot him in the leg, shattering his tibia.
His roommate had a mental problem too, and if he didn't take his medication, why, then he was just more or less wacky. And evidently he'd been off his medication for a while, and him and Brad got into it.
They were doing some kind of siding or roofing or something for a friend. And Brad hit Emmett's finger with a hammer. And that's what Emmett said he shot him for.
Unaware of Brad Wren's alleged confession, arson investigator Becky Gibbs was assigned to investigate the arson fire of Sergeant Bachmeyer's home. She saw evidence that was inconsistent with a fire set for revenge.
And typically, if somebody's going to set a fire for revenge, they may go to some trouble to set a fire, but this particular way of setting a fire takes some time.
The debris from the fire was analyzed using gas chromatography, which found traces of gasoline in the debris. There was also evidence that road flares were used to ignite the gasoline.
These would be considered a time delay device. Instead of road flare on fire, the fire doesn't start right away, but once it reaches the point where it's touching the gas container, then the gas container would melt and the fire would start.
Most fires set for revenge do not use time delay devices. The flares would have given Sergeant Bachmeyer enough time to drive to the bowling alley to establish his alibi before the gasoline containers exploded. Investigators were also suspicious because Bachmeyer's artwork, porcelain collection, and bowling trophies were found undamaged in his backyard shed after the fire. Sergeant Bachmeyer became the prime suspect. He adamantly denied any involvement, but when asked to take a lie detector test, he refused. Under increasing scrutiny, Sergeant Bachmeyer had no choice but to produce Brad Wren's alleged confession, even though it implicated Bachmeyer in stealing from a reputed drug dealer. When police tried to interview Brad Wren to corroborate his confession, they discovered he was missing.
There wasn't any of his clothes, none of his shoes, nothing left in the house.
I knew Brad was dead. I knew it. I don't know how I knew it. And then my son was dead. We would have heard from him. He would have never went off and left his dog with nobody taking care of him. He would have never, he would have just never left them like that.
Detective Denny Gola asked Matt Bachmeyer if he knew anything about Wren's disappearance, since Bachmeyer was the last known person to see Wren alive.
Starts laughing and goes, well, you find him dead with my business card nailed to his forehead. I know who to come talk to, and kind of laughs it off, kind of jokingly. And I wrote that down when he said it. That's kind of bizarre.
Police could find no arrest record for anyone by the name of Pepe Fernandez, and police officials say Bachmeyer's handling of Brad Wren's interrogation was improper.
Highly for a experienced police sergeant in 25 years to take a statement like that alone from a suspect. And then certainly to release him immediately afterwards would be extremely rare.
Although Brad Wren's family identified the signature on the bottom of the alleged confession as Brad's, forensic document examiners weren't entirely convinced.
That's it. There you go.
In Seattle, Washington,
That's it. Grab
police
it.
were conducting
That's it.
two
Good deal.
simultaneous investigations. One into the fire that destroyed Police Sergeant Matt Bachmeyer's home. The other, a search for the whereabouts of Brad Wren. They were connected, since Brad Wren was last seen alive in the back seat of Sergeant Bachmeyer's patrol car.
That was the last sighting we had, and in police investigations, the last person seen with someone who's alive is certainly going to attract your interest.
The 4.5-page statement in which Brad Wren allegedly admitted to taking part in the arson of Sergeant Bachmeyer's home was written.
I'm calling it. I will see you guys later on. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be there live then. Lots of love. Bye everybody.